The End of Oz, Chapter 6. Knox, Madison, and I didn't have long to wait. At the far end of the courtyard, a section of wall swung inward. It was a door, I realized, effectively camouflaged by being indistinguishable from the stone walls around it. We exchanged nervous glances. "So, what's the deal with this chick?" I asked Knox. "To be honest, I wasn't ever sure she was real," Knox said. "We started hearing stories about her right before you showed up in Oz. But like everything in Ev, it's impossible to say what's true and what's some crazy story. It's not like we have a passenger pigeon service across the deadly desert." "But it's possible to cross, or you wouldn't have heard anything." Mombi, he paused for a second, conflicting emotions battling for supremacy on his face. "There are spells. It's been done at least once." He wouldn't meet my eyes. He was being deliberately vague. I fought back the urge to hit him. He was always going to be Knox, no matter how I felt about him, refusing to tell me everything until he decided it was time for me to know the whole truth. "Okay," I said, keeping my voice even. "And obviously the Gnome King can go back and forth. That still doesn't cover who Langwider is." "Honestly, I'm not sure you want to know," Knox said. "We're about to go face this bitch right here," Madison interrupted, jabbing her finger at the yawning black doorway. "And Holmes Slice over here is holding back because he thinks his information is too scary to tell in the dark for the girls to handle. In case you missed the memo, we're going to find out the truth in about T-5, so maybe tell us what you know." Knox looked at her, startled. Despite the seriousness of her predicament, I had to resist the urge to laugh. Madison clearly had no use for Knox's pretty boy mystery act. He shot an apprehensive look at the open doorway, and then said, "Supposedly, she's into wearing people's heads. She has a collection. Nobody knows what she really looks like." "Oh," I said. Okay, that was pretty gross. Incredibly, Madison rolled her eyes in disdain. "That's so Silence of the Lambs. It can't possibly be real," she said. "Somebody plagiarized that plot point just to scare you. I don't believe it for a second." "I'm pretty sure they don't have Anthony Hopkins in Oz," I pointed out. "I'm trying to keep our spirits up. Can you work with me?" Madison snapped. "Right," I said. "Sorry. So our options are to stay in the courtyard with no food and no water in the middle of a desert and die of dehydration shortly if we don't sunburn to a fiery crisp, or go into Scary Princess Palace and meet an unknown, potentially very gruesome fate with no weapons and possibly no magic." Knox thought for a minute. "We could wait to see if the Wheelers come back," he offered. "Please tell me this isn't really happening," Madison said to the sky. "Someone, are you there? God, it's me, Madison." "I know," I said sympathetically. "It's not ideal." "Ideal?" Madison snorted. "I'm still not convinced I didn't actually smoke some really bunk weed. Not that I would do that, I am a mother now, but if this is real—" She waved a hand at the creepy courtyard. "You might as well get this part over with, right? I'm about to drop dead of a heat stroke." "Ladies first," Knox said, ushering me forward with the ghost of a smile. At that, I did sock him in the shoulder, and he flashed me a real grin that made my knees weak. It felt like 10 years ago that I'd been kissing him in the Emerald Palace, and a flush of heat that had nothing to do with the scorching sunlight rose to my cheeks. He took my hand and squeezed it. "We got this," I told him, with more confidence than I felt. "It can't be as bad as the Scarecrow's lab." "It could be worse," Knox said cheerfully. "Thanks for the encouragement," I said. But I was smiling as we walked toward the doorway. Whatever was waiting for us, we were going to face it together. Madison was right. The cool, dark corridor might be leading us to our doom, but after the hellish journey across the desert, being out of the sun was a blissful relief. If we got out of here alive, I was never going to take shade for granted again. I stood blinking for a moment, allowing my eyes to adjust to the sudden change in light. As I got used to the dim corridor, I was able to pick out elaborate carved murals in the stone walls. Dropping Knox's hand, I stepped to look closer. They were the stuff of nightmares. Multi-limbed demons with white, blubbery skin that reminded me of dolphins, and oversized heads with bulging black eyes tearing people apart. Monsters with 3 or 4 or 5 heads wolfing down human flesh. Helpless humans boiling in vats of oil or being tormented in any number of awful devices. Most of the people seemed to be missing their heads. which were carried around instead by the monsters. Monsters bowled with them, made necklaces out of them, lounged in huge thrones made of grinning skulls. "Someone's into Eli Roth," Madison said dryly next to me. I raised an eyebrow. "If I'm not being a smartass, I'm going to start screaming my head off," she said. "I'm assuming you prefer me being a smartass." "Yes," Knox said from up ahead of us. "Definitely go with the smartass route, please. Can we get a move on?" "Right," I said. We'd have to face this mysterious Princess Langwyater sooner or later. Might as well get it over with now. Without another word, I followed him down the hallway, doing my best to ignore the Saw 5 scenery. Madison was a few steps behind me. The hallway wound up, down, and around. Here and there it was lit with torches and burned with sickly greenish flame that gave off no heat at all. But when Madison reached out curiously to touch one, she yanked her hand back with a yelp of pain. "It burned me," she said, staring at the cold green fire. "But not like fire. I think it, frostbit me." The light was just enough to make our way by, although in places it created looming, flickering shadows that moved ominously toward us, until I was jumpy and paranoid, sure that at any moment something was going to leap out of the dark at us and tear us into shreds. Sometimes we passed huge rooms, a banquet hall with a vaulted gilt ceiling, circules of gold spinning down the walls in the shape of vines and thorns, a narrow stone table long enough to seat dozens of people, high-backed wooden chairs carved in more elaborate twisted patterns, rooms that looked like saloons with sofas covered in black velvet and more gilt, or bedrooms furnished with looming black wardrobes and shadowy figures that startled me into frightening silence before I realized they were just our own reflections peering back at us out of tall, ornate mirrors. Every room was deserted, and every room was full of mirrors and heads, patterned into the carpet, carved into the chairs and bedposts, painting of heads on the walls, velvety curtains embroidered with heads. "I have a bad feeling about this," Madison said under her breath as we crept slowly forward. "Tell me about it," I muttered. Knox held up his hand to hush us. Madison rolled her eyes at him, but he shook his head. "I can hear something," he hissed. In the ensuing silence I strained to catch whatever he was talking about, and then I heard it too. A faint scratching, as if a mouse was scrabbling through the walls 100 yards away. It was coming from up ahead, and I was pretty sure that whatever it wasn't a mouse. Knox jerked his head forward, one eyebrow cocked, and I shrugged. "What are we going to do? Turn around? Try to escape the courtyard, walk back to the deadly desert, and hope the road of yellow brick showed up again? As my mom used to say once upon a time, before the pills anyway, there was no way out but through." My mom, but no. I pushed that thought down as soon as it reared up. I couldn't think about her right now. "Let's do this," I said, and strode forward toward the source of the noise. The narrow hallway opened up suddenly with a room so enormous I almost tripped in surprise. A vaulted cathedral-like ceiling soared upward. Huge black marble columns formed 2 orderly lines leading to an immense throne at the far end of the room. The floor was polished to a blinding glow that wasn't the part that made us all shield our eyes against this sudden dazzling light. Every surface of the room was covered in mirrors. Every wall, every shelf, every corner, every nook and cranny. As my eyes slowly adjusted to the brilliance, I realized that cunningly placed windows allowed sunlight in at angles that maximized the sparkle. It felt like we were standing inside a giant disco ball with the strobe light going. The effect was disorienting but strangely beautiful. A strange, alternate world echo of the shifting, sparkling mists at Rainbow Falls. But it was sinister, too. The fragmented mirrors made it look as though our heads were refracted hundreds of times, looking out in disembodied confusion from every angle no matter which way we turned. The scratching sound was coming from the far end of the room. There a black-clad figure, the only other person in the enormous space, was bent over a table in front of the giant throne. Slowly, cautiously, we walked closer. The figure was a woman, who was wearing a loose, silky black kimono-type outfit, embroidered with faces in delicate gold thread. Long, glossy black hair spilled down her back, and her face was hidden under an eerie, expressionless silver mask. She had a ledger of some kind in front of her. The scratching was the sound of an old-fashioned quill pen moving across the rough paper as she filled out line after line of numbers, pausing occasionally to dip the nib of a ruby jar of pitch-black ink. She didn't stop writing as we approached her, and she didn't look up, even when the three of us had crossed the entire room and stood in front of her. I stepped forward. "Hi, I'm Amy Gum, and this—" "I know who you are," the woman said shortly, still not looking up. "Wait till I'm done."